Hey guys, just a reminder that the 2022 Small Town Monsters Kickstarter is happening right now. You can be a part of funding all 4 of our feature-length film productions that are coming out this year. You can get your name in the credits and all that stuff. You can also be a part of helping to fund all the amazing YouTube content we're putting out. The link is in the description. Hit the button, become a backer, be a part of Small Town Monsters.
This is Monsteropolis, a podcast about Bigfoot. It's recorded
Today
for the skeptics,
Oh
the
my
believers,
goodness.
the knowers, and those who just have a casual interest in the subject. It's also about monsters and anomalies and legends. I am Andy Matzke, back again, hosting. You liked it so much last week that here I am again, and I'm joined today, as always, by my father, Mark Matzke. So this week's episode is about Bigfoot in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't really connect. I mean, and I guess you think of Bigfoot in like the Northwest, you think of Washington, Oregon, California. But you don't really realize that Idaho and Montana are right there.
Right.
Even though in the eastern part of Washington and into Idaho you have the desert, there still is the mountains and all that. So, you wanna hear a story?
I'd love to hear a story.
So, last night, it's a personal story. No, I was looking through Apes Among Us, and in Apes Among Us, John Green talks about how there was in New Haven, Connecticut, the Evening Register on November 11th, 1892, published a story from Montana, from the Anaconda. What was it? It's the Anaconda Standard.
Wow.
And this is in 1892. And in saying all this, I realized that I don't know where that is. They talk about the mountains. So look it up. But I was quite interested about that. And in Apes Among Us, he only briefly quotes a line or two. So I was thinking, I could do a little bit more research on this. And so I did. And so I want to give a big shout out to Seth Breedlove, who I'm not sure if he knows that I still have his newspapers.com login at home, but I do. And so I was able to track down that the Anaconda Standard, it has been digitized that far back. And I have here what the headline was, which is a great headline, completely great. And the headline reads, "With gun and fishpole, hunters and anglers leave for streams and forests. Want to kill something." Now that has nothing to do with what I'm about to tell you. Next part. And then there's one more headline that says, "Sporting goods dealers in Clover, a strange animal seen by a man from the mountains." Now, what the first part of this article is, and this section in the newspaper stretches all the way down the page. What the first 2 or 3 paragraphs are about are just the fact that there are a bunch of hunters and fishers who want to go out into this area and go fishing. That's what it's about. It's how local sportswear dealers are run over by the fact there's so many people. And there's even a quote in there that talks about how, and I wrote it down, that they want to kill anything they can, and that there's a quote, they want a quote, baptism of blood. That's fun.
Wow.
Talk about manifest destiny. Now, what they do go on to talk about is the article then continues after talking about how they just want to go out killing mountain lions, buffalo.
Everything that moves.
Yep. Just relieve their stress from their long hours on the farm, on the prairie, go up in the mountains and just
let loose.
So then it
End
goes
lives.
on to say, Some of the old-time hunters and Indian fighters who are still holding out in the city should endeavor.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Just a light print there.
Hey, they wrote their E's funny. Should endeavor.
Old English. That really goes back.
Should endeavor to find a wide-eyed individual who came in from the mountains this morning. Whether he discovered a new brand of whiskey or whether it was the loneliness of his life in the mountains that caused him to see visions and hear sounds is not known. But whether the cause, he told a story that knocks Joe Klafke's ghost story, attested to by Jack Brennan, completely in the shade.
Take that, Joe.
Blam! I did no research into that ghost story.
Yeah, well, it's okay.
We don't care about ghosts.
You just got schooled.
Yeah. Burn.
Ouch.
He said that over in the range of mountains, which forms a part of the Wyoming line, he had seen evidence of the existence of a creature whose genius was unknown. No, it's genus. It is genus.
Genus.
His genius was quite unknown. It was a smart Sasquatch. Yeah. Apparently, no co-host of the show can read besides you and Heather. Seth and I can't read.
His horse-haired weaving was unparalleled. He's a genius artist.
Whose genius
Stick
was
structure making
real tall.
Genius of height.
Whose genius was unknown to him. Genus was
genus.
How do you say it?
Genus.
That's what I said.
You said genius.
Genus. Genus was unknown to him. Did I say it right?
Yes.
Okay. He also claimed to have obtained a glimpse of the varmint, but always when he was unarmed. And and its appearance was such as not to invite a close inspection. He had never sought to get near enough to it to see just what it was, he says. The animal is covered with hair, but in the form it is not unlike a man. A resemblance that is increased by the creature's habit of rising on its haunches and walking on its hind legs after the manner of a gorilla. After having seen the animal, the man said he could account for the existence of the torn and partly eaten carcasses of several large bears and also of one mountain sheep that he claimed to have found in the vicinity of where the unknown animal appeared.
A torn carcass of a bear. Wow.
Yeah. The stranger says he will return to the mountains shortly and will pilot anyone who may desire to visit the locality to the exact spot where he last saw the monster.
Whoa.
Now that was printed originally in the August 20th, 1892 edition of the Anaconda, Montana Standard. And they mentioned Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's out east in Montana,
mm-hmm.
on the east side of town. Now, what was interesting to me about that, in looking through other articles briefly in the Anaconda Standard, is the sheer volume of mentions of gorillas at that time. Like, you would think this is a newspaper out in the new West, blossoming West. They sure did like their news about gorillas.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was a lot. It was definitely on their mind. I believe, if I remember my search parameters correctly, even within 1892, there probably were at least half dozen or more, which is just an interesting observation. It shows that, like, gorillas were really on the minds of people during those times. There even was an article that talked about someone bringing gorillas back to possibly domesticate them and make them be servants.
Oh my.
And I was like, oh, okay. Obviously, that didn't work.
No.
Very reminiscent of the classic Bela Lugosi film Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Yes.
Which
train them to do your evil bidding.
One of my favorite movies ever. 1932? Yeah. 31, 32.
Oh my.
Great film. But
then you're right. And we're going to say more about the gorillas.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, here's the end of my story.
All right.
My story. In flipping through, doing a little bit of last minute research, that story, as it is exactly printed, is found in the Best of SasWhat Bigfoot. So I didn't need to do all my research, but it's cool that I did because I got to see the actual thing. I don't know if it's from On the Track of Sasquatch or Encounters with Bigfoot, but if you want to read it, it's in here.
You went to the primary source.
But I went to the primary source and I saw it with my own eyes through the digitalizedness and
Research 101 right there.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
What was interesting though is the New Haven, Connecticut Evening Register is not digitized yet. I mean,
yeah.
But
I think part of what that speaks to, at least a little bit, is how relatively recent the discovery of gorillas was, which explains how it was on everyone's minds and became a convenient sort of like a paradigm for people to talk about a hairy, large figure. And so that it'd be interesting to see like comparison between gorilla and wild man and how those compare, like
when that switch occurs.
When the switch occurs. Yeah, exactly.
Would be really interesting because, I mean, for us, we would say, of course, it looked like a gorilla or a big ape, but this wasn't really known at the time. And what's real interesting about that story is it makes it sound like this is a creature that is not always on its back legs, which to me is like a modern feature of Bigfoot that's talked about not a lot these days, but enough that it's
made a resurgence. For sure.
That it's Bigfoot will run down on like 4 legs. You heard that a lot on like Finding Bigfoot, I remember.
Sure.
And you sort of hear that all over. I think
thermal footage purports to show Bigfoot crawling, stuff like that.
And here it is in 1892, apparently being talked about that this creature travels both bipedally and jumps down on all 4s.
Yeah.
Or this is sort of the inverse of that, but it shows that it does both. So what's compelling to me is the historical precedent for things in Bigfoot in these like wild man gorilla reports that really don't make a lot of sense. Like that aren't something that if you were making up a story, you would really make up. And I guess the point I'm trying to say, and I guess I'm making it poorly, is there's things that people say happen today that are kind of weird. But there's a historical precedent for those things that goes back to the 1800s.
Yeah.
Like whistling and getting up on all 4s are kind of the only 2 things I can think of. I mean, they're big and hairy and they stink, but like that's sort of the 2 things. Those are things that to me in 1890, if I'm making up a story, that I don't know if I'd do that. I'd make it better. You know? So
yeah, well, there's certainly some very extremely strange wild man stories.
And certainly some wild man stories are probably fake because you're in the business of selling papers.
Yeah.
And some are definitely, as been said in other places, not actually wild man as we would probably associate.
Sure.
Probably evidences of previous prejudice and bias.
But if you're making up fictional features of a creature,
but then there are some that it talks about it being very ape-like, like in describing it like a gorilla, and it being 8 feet tall and things like that, that you don't think you'd make up. And that's personally part of my conviction with this whole phenomenon is, people could make up stories now, but people who would have to do an extraordinary amount of research, or at least a substantial amount of research, to accurately make up some sort of story.
That would harmonize with what's gone before. Yeah.
And that's sort of where I get confused, and I don't think that it's either the greatest hoax and ongoing,
the most enduring tall tale of
or
all
there's
time.
a little something to it. That's it. That's that rant.
Okay.
What you got there?
Well, the thing that I find very intriguing here is that perhaps the connecting point between the stories that you have and the ones that I have are that a lot of them are the eyewitness accounts of hunters, because you led in that report with, basically the advertisement, come and kill stuff in Montana, which, was done with almost no, what would you say, self-control back.
Yeah, that wasn't like, oh, these guys are terrible. It's just more like, they're a wild bunch of dudes, but they want to go out and...
With no regulations either. I mean, it's not like hunting today where you're licensed and taking classes and all that stuff. But the point that I'm making here is that I'm using a lot of contemporary, very up-to-date sources in what I am going to bring to the table. But the point of connection is hunters. Once again, I think that's probably going to be your largest pool of those who are filing reports in that part of the country, because that's who's out there. We're talking about places that are not obviously highly populated. I've made the point before that one of the things, and I got it from somebody else, it's not unique to me. The point is, to have a sighting, you have to have people, or else there's no sighting. There's just a creature walking along by itself. And when you get out to the region of the country we're talking about, the population of people dwindles significantly. So the reason that they're out there is for recreation, whether it's mountain climbing, kayaking, fishing, and hunting. So this leads into a story that I am drawing from this resource called The Day Sasquatch Became Real for Me by Steve Isdall, who I had not heard of him until seeing the book on the Perry Library shelf. And I'm not going to read it word for word because I don't think that's fair to a fairly new book to do that. But I will summarize the report. And this is Montana. The person reporting this sighting was 13 years old in the summer of 1983. They went on a vacation with the family to Superior, Montana, which is west of Missoula, getting out, I think it's the western half of the gigantic state, and not too far away from Glacier, relatively speaking. So anyway, it's a long drive to get there. They finally made it. One of the days, the reporters, the one making the report here, his father and uncle and an older cousin and the older brother went out trout fishing. One of his uncle's brothers was a forest ranger. He told the experiencer's father and uncle about a nice fishing spot. They went there, and the morning that they got up, they loaded all the gear, went down to the place, and the sun was coming up. They got their poles in, were fishing, having a great time, and walked down to this area in the creek where all of a sudden they ran across a big bull elk that was dead in the creek. And it was not there until now, meaning the uncle had just been there very recently. So this was a fresh kill, if you will. And its neck was broken as if it had been spun around. So I thought right away when you were reading about bears with ragged, being torn apart, this is the report that.
So Bigfoot in Montana just rips
stuff
wildlife
up
to shreds. Yeah. Bigfoot rips wildlife to shreds.
Episode title right there. So they, as they approached it, the thing that freaked this 13-year-old out was that the elk was still warm.
Why'd he touch it?
Well, I mean, these are like outdoorsy hunting type people. It could be
hands.
This just happened. He asked, how did it happen? There was an embankment above the river. One of the adults posited that it may have fallen off the embankment.
Dumb elk.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know.
Oh, look, a river. Oh,
yeah. Snap. Elk are in the habit of just stumbling around in nature.
Those Montana elk.
I know. They need to watch themselves. This is the part, one of the details that just fascinates me and is one of the reasons that I want to get out there so much. He says,
so I can see the cliffs that they tumble down.
No, this is what I'm about to say. He was 13 and was in awe of a massive bull elk larger than a horse. So when you hear elk, we're not talking about deer. We're talking about much more massive creatures. And somebody recently sent me a picture. They had hunted elk and got one. And,
wow.
And I was, again, stunned because here's a human right in proximity to this elk, and the elk was massive. And it wasn't like forced perspective or anything. It was just a gigantic animal.
It wasn't like he had a tiny toy elk that he placed right in front of the camera.
Next to his boot. Look what I got on my great trip. But no, it was... so they go around the corner in the creek. And the two boys, the youngest boys, 13-year-old being one, discover footprints. So they're clearly large footprints. He had a cousin who was about 6'4". They said, go make footprints next to that. And he couldn't match the length, obviously, nor come close to the depth. Classic sort of reporting scenario. And then they heard sounds. And here is where I will be a little bit close to the actual description. I was looking in the way that the tracks were going, and I heard something large ahead of me and seen the bushes or whatever they were pushed to the side like someone went through them. Then I smelled something bad, like an old musky skunk. I froze. The hair on my head felt like it stuck out straight. Head, arms, and legs. I saw something so massive passing through the thick vegetation by the trees, standing and watching me, rocking side to side. Dark and way bigger than my cousin. I didn't know what to do. Heard a crack of a branch, and he just did that, like the crack of the branch sort of symbolizes almost. He snapped and runs up the creek and runs back to where the adults were and reports on his sighting. One thing, we talk about features that transcend time or that go from one era to another, and that rocking back and forth motion. This is a report that happened in 1983. Originally, it seems like it's not something that's colored by finding Bigfoot or modern reporting that has talked about Bigfoot. This goes back in time. And so he and his cousin run and can't get out, will not be removed from the van in which they drove to this area. Nothing can get them out of the van. He resolutely stays put until the rest of the party comes back and leaves.
And at the end, the elk was still warm. I like that story. I like when that story is. Mm-hmm. Because that's sort of, the 80s is sort of a time that's not too frequently talked about in Bigfoot, I think. And that's when Night Siege happened.
Right.
And that's like my favorite. So it's cool to hear a story from that. I briefly looked for stories from then, and I don't think I found any. I found some from the late 60s, which is also an interesting time because you hear about the 70s, and the 70s were great for Bigfoot, like iconic. What about right around the 70s? That's what I was thinking last night, and really didn't get much of an answer.
Well, as so often is the case, the questions are more interesting.
Yeah. I didn't really pursue I was like, that's a good question.
Yeah.
But no, we'll see if we actually get into Idaho in this episode.
Okay.
Because I have a good Idaho story from 1968.
Ooh.
But
I have an excellent Idaho story that I think you will love.
How many stories have we told? 2 on this episode?
2, yeah.
And it's 40 minutes in?
Yeah.
Let me tell you a little story. That's real little.
We'll each do a little story.
We'll each do one more little one.
Yes.
So this is real little, but it ties back to what we were talking about earlier. And it takes place, let me say it this way. This story is from Apes Among Us, I believe. And the way John Green talks about it, he says that one day him and Renee were on a radio show. And that's how it's referenced.
Uh-huh.
And I can only assume it's Renee DeHinden.
Yes.
Which is like my favorite of the 4 horsemen. And they were on some radio show, and they received a report from a lady who grew up in Montana. She mentioned the snowy mountains, and apparently there's snowy mountains in 2 parts of the state. it said this. There's in central and the northwestern part, and he never got clarification. But that when this girl was growing up in Montana, she remember hearing stories that they had to keep the cattle at lower elevations because if they didn't, then the hairy man or the hairy men would kill them.
Whoa.
Which is a really cool story. But then Green goes on to say, I'm pretty sure he goes on to say this, he's never heard anything else like that. He's looked into it, and there's no other corroborating stories, but it's a good story. And it's, again, from that another time that we really don't think of, which is 1900s, 1904. Montana. See, I sort of start thinking about Red Dead Redemption 2, but you can't go up too high in the mountains or the hairy man will get you. Or
it's a very interesting practical consideration.
Yeah. And it's like you talked about on The Lore Bigfoot all over the country. Go listen to that after you're done here. But there are practical aspects to this sometime that come into play, like when we were on the Chestnut Ridge, below the Chestnut Ridge. And the homeowner of the property we're at told us that they had to bring their horses in at night, and that they were kind of concerned because they had seen big cats around, and their neighbors had seen big cats. And those don't exist in the Allegheny Mountains anymore. But there was someone matter-of-factly saying, just talking about their life, I think we had commented on the horses, is how it got brought up.
Right.
That, sometimes this seems to affect people's lives in very real ways.
And the person who told us this seemed more annoyed than anything.
Oh, yeah. She wasn't this is some cool, scary story. It's
exactly.
I have to bring them in or they'll get attacked.
Yeah.
Right. I hate when that happens. I hate when I have to bring in the dog so Mothman doesn't get him. Stupid dog.
Harold, Panther, he's back.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that particular instance because, again, talking about practical outcomes, Stan Gordon is really the first person that I heard mention the reaction of animals to strange phenomena as a way of talking about their empirical reality. It's one thing for a person to hoax or tell a story, but as far as we know, dogs don't hoax.
Yeah.
Or, livestock don't play pranks that we're aware of.
Hey, lay down and we'll cut your eyes out with this laser.
It'll freak the humans out, man.
Hey, bite
Watch
me like
this.
it looks like hey, scratch me like a giant monster would. That's a dog talking. The first one was a cow. They have the same voice.
If you squint, you'll see what he's talking about.
Yeah. Lay back, squint, you'll get it.
You'll get
anyways,
it.
Yeah.
One other story.
You can't hoax the animals.
Except
you can throw something, act like you throw something, and a dog will run.
That's true. But it's
the
a reaction.
Animals
it's a reaction.
Aren't hoaxing.
They aren't hoaxing, and they're reacting to some stimuli that makes them act in a fearful manner. I guess that's closing the circle. It's not just that they're not doing
You
one
can't
thing.
fool a dog.
Yeah, you have story after story of dogs that have reputations for being very fierce and protective, and then after having this encounter with some unknown thing, are cowering under the porch or won't come out, and are just traumatized by what's happened. The other Montana story that I had, I'm not going to go through it right now, but I will just briefly summarize it because I love this story so much because of all the things all the tangents. And I will look up when it happened. That's the only thing that I will examine here. Let's see. Okay. Because it helps to set the stage in. Well, it doesn't matter. It was
It doesn't say.
It doesn't say. It's fairly modern day because it talks about watching. Here's the thing. It's a truck driver.
Okay.
Former military, becomes a truck driver after he retires to keep doing something. He's driving across Montana, has a partner with him in the truck. So one guy had a laptop, the other had a DVD player. So that sort of locates the time. They're at a truck stop, like one of these big, on the interstate highway system truck stops, late at night, early morning. And bottom line is there is a SasWhat rambling around the parked trucks in the truck stop. Yeah, like banging on trucks, moving just out of sight of the lights, because you imagine they've got these big arc lights in the truck stop parking lot. And the fun part that would have been to read that story verbatim was all the stuff I would have to bleep out. But it's just as fascinating because you would think that, and maybe there are a lot, and I'm just not aware of it, but you would think that there would be a lot of trucker sightings of Bigfoot because of the sheer percentage of roadside sightings that happen from vehicles. Plus then, where these truck stops are typically located is not in the center of town. It's more out on the edge of town somewhere, close by an expressway, but also not even suburban. So you have this mixture of wilder area plus people who are generally like letting their guard down and sleeping off their route, getting ready to travel to another place. So that whole milieu of truck stop Bigfoot sighting, I just love that.
Maybe
it's fascinating.
There are more truck stop Bigfoot sightings. They just have some sort of CB radio handle for it that we don't know, like some sort of code.
Oh, you may be onto something there.
Like, I don't even know what it could be. They'd be like, breaker. Pillsbury tipped over the doughboy again. That meant I saw one by the truck stop.
Yeah.
We don't know.
King Kong on the flip-flop.
Yeah. Donkey Kong Mario truck. Okay, so that's a great story. I really like it.
Yeah, I mean, there's guns. I didn't even get into the guns. Yeah, they load their weapons. It's really cool. Yeah, it's a really cool story.
Bigfoot adventures into the city of the truck stop.
Yeah, Bigfoot's the one with the gun.
Bigfoot loaded his rifle.
That he got from 1892.
Yeah.
It's a musket.
Yeah. I picked that off from the lonely man up in the mountain.
Baptism of blood, huh?
I'll show you. It's like a musket. He has to load the barrel. Yeah. Anyways,
Montana Bigfoot.
Who knew? He rips animals into shreds. If you
just like on the movie,
yeah, he goes, or bears, like a piece of paper.
Yes.
Got a lot of built up frustration, that Montana Sasquatch. Just send good thoughts his way. If you enjoyed this week's episode of Monsteropolis, we will be back next week for more. Who knows what we'll talk about? Well, Bigfoot. Just where will he be? Like this video if you like it. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Back the Kickstarter. That's what we need. We need you to back the Kickstarter, please, and thank you.
This Thursday.
Send us mail, monsteropolismail@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at STM_broadcasting_network. We're on Facebook at STMBN. Listen to Heather Motherf. I did it accidentally. Listen to Heather Mosier's show, The Lore You Know, on this very YouTube channel, or wherever you find podcasts. Just look up The Lore You Know, and it'll be there. You'll see its UFO logo. That's it for this week's show, and keep it squatchy, everybody.